Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is October 29th, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can go pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And always remember to share the things you learn to your network. Oki, naganako, meko che chestakom aki, or Nara Daga de Dakots Nagot Tene Siku Saradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I am a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Klitchotine Indahe and Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis is Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. My late great-grandfather, Milo Bewol of Delaney, his daughter, Alice, is now my late granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellow Knives Dene. Through my father, I am the daughter of a Mayflower and the daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous people's inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, life is harder if you are part of a racialized group. 42% of members of a racialized group do not have timely access to culturally appropriate health and well-being services, a conversation we're going to expand on today. And 40% of members of a racialized group can't find suitable employment, which is up from 31% of last year because of racist business owners and business practices and policies in HR. I am not a social worker nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share my journey as a Dene mom navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist, ableist world in 2024. As a trauma-informed Dene woman who has attempted to run, join harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow colonial incarceration, a denial of justice, a denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have work to continue, reports to advocate for, an attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride should never be 1 month. It's important to understand the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. Can they be performative? Of course. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning. We know when you don't understand what you're saying, creating more harm. I encourage folks to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors' stories of displacement and how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous peoples know how safe you are to be around. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nation's names, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, myself, because we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance or worse, willful anti-Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, you show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book Unreconciled explains that perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism and capitalism, but it would be a part of understanding treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. As a former geomatics drafter, be happy to teach you more, but you're going to have to pay me, and you'll have to go to nativecalgarian.com to find out more about that. So with that, I'd like to invite my guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself in your way?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm Petra Schulz. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm in Miskochi, Westgeheiken. Pardon for my poor pronunciation of the Cree word for Beaver Hills, or colonially known as Edmonton, which is in Treaty 6 on the beautiful Saskatchewan River, and really a meeting ground and former trading route for many Indigenous people. I'm, as you can tell by my accent, probably, I was not born here. I was born in Germany, and I came to Turtle Island as an adult. I think I have an interesting family story, because on both sides of my families, actually, I come from German roots, but displaced German roots. My forefathers and mothers went east to Romania and the Balkan region and settled there, and had settled in the land that is between the Danube and the Black Sea, which is called the Dobruja. And during the Second World War, because of alliances and wars and displacement, they left that region and settled in what was then called West Germany. So I'm the first generation for many generations of my family born in Germany. And I promptly left. And I'm a mom of three, and one of my children was born here. My husband also comes from a German family background, and his family roots is also from displaced people. So I think I understand displacement, and I've also come to learn through the discussion of intergenerational trauma. One time I stood in front of a bookshelf in Germany and said, the trauma of being displaced during war. And I thought, wow, I'm an intergenerational survivor of trauma. It's kind of, it took the learning through what Indigenous people go through for me to understand that. And I'm not equating trauma to trauma. They're different degrees of trauma, but
sure.
My grandma told me so many stories. I know they experienced much, and much of it was difficult, losing children and losing everything you own, fleeing on horse and wagon and those kind of things. So that's my family background. I said I'm a mom of three, but only two are still with me. The oldest, who identifies as with the pronouns they and them, they're gender diverse, and then our middle child, a son, and the youngest son, Danny, is actually what brings me here today. Danny was one of the early victims of fentanyl in 2014, when through really our failed drug policies, more and more toxic drugs were arriving on the market, and he was living in recovery or wellness at the time, but always there's a lot he didn't understand and a lot we didn't understand, and we were always there for him, but maybe not in the right way. I did not know about harm reduction and what it can do to save lives.
Sure.
Never believed in tough love. I was never a proponent of tough love. So Danny lived in maybe unstable recovery, and he was on medication for some time. He was on methadone, but then both he and me, we thought, well, methadone is just another opioid. We wanted him what people call clean, which a word I no longer use and don't believe in. But as I said, there's much we didn't know. So there was this expectation for him to be drug-free, and he just couldn't quite function drug-free. So the day before he died, and I think for me this is significant because people always say, oh, is it harm reduction or recovery? And to me, it's both. We need harm reduction and we need treatment, because without harm reduction, people don't live to get there. Because Danny, a day before he died, he asked me to make an appointment with his doctor and his psychologist. And I didn't go, oh, Danny, are you using again? Because that wouldn't have been a healthy conversation. So I just left it that I made the appointments the next morning, and by the afternoon, he died by using one more time. He'd bought one more pill, which he probably thought was his last time using, and it was his last time using in a very, very different way. And my husband and I, we found him in his apartment, and to this day, every ambulance and every fire truck puts me on edge. And there's so many ambulances and fire trucks these days. And always when one is going by, I thought, wow, are you going to a drug poisoning event? I hope the person will live. So, but what I did after Danny had died, I heard a news report that on the lands of the Kainai First Nation, on the land of the Kainai First Nation, 10 people had died in a 2-week period. And I thought, this is so incredible. This is so incredible, I said, and nobody is telling their stories. And I said to my husband, we have to tell Danny's story, because people, they stigmatize, and there are racist elements in there. And sometimes as a white person, and I acknowledge my whiteness and my privilege. And one time when I said to a nursing friend at McEwen, she said, I told her about my feeling about that privilege, that white privilege. She said, you have to use it. You have to use it effectively for all people. So I started sharing Danny's story. And in sharing that story, got out in the media and such, I connected with 2 other women who had also lost their children, their sons, one through substance use related suicide, and the other one through a cocktail of prescription and street drugs, and as Leslie McBain and Lorna Thomas. And when I talked to them for the first time, I felt I was talking to people who understood me. There's so much stigma to losing a child to substance use. One of my best friends, when I started advocacy, there's a dog in the background.
That's perfect. 4-leggeds are welcome on mine.
So good. So one of my best friends said, when I started doing advocacy, why do you blame everyone else? Danny had choices to make, and he made bad choices. And I thought, oh my God, there's so much wrong with this statement. And so I understood the stigma, but when Lorna and Leslie and we got together, we understood each other. And we started, there was an organization in the UK of parents speaking out. And we realized the power of the parent voice because of the stigma of substance use. Substance users themselves are not listened to, are often not respected. I mean, you see it in the political discourse these days. It's horrific. But it's really hard to slam the door in the face of a grieving mom. And we used that. We got together. So 2016, there were 6 of us. We formed Mom Stop the Harm. we had by then understood it was about harm reduction. So we wanted stopping the harm in there.
Yeah.
And now we have members, we have thousands of members Canada-wide, most in BC, Alberta, and Ontario, which coincidentally are also the families hardest hit. And our members initially were families that lost loved ones, but now we have families as well who whose loved ones are using substances or seeking wellness or living in wellness, varying degrees. We also have allies in our midst who are very important to us. And so we have this national organization, and we have our struggles like every small. Our advocacy work that we do is all done by volunteers. Yeah. We don't have a single paid person doing advocacy. We do have funding from the BC government and from the federal government through the Substance Use and Addiction Program, the SUA program, and we run support groups, which are really, really important. One is for people who have lost a loved one. They're called Healing Hearts, and these are peer support groups. And the other one is Holding Hope. And then we've started, we have some Indigenous members, and they've started healing circles in their communities. There are a couple of healing circles in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba. We have found that Indigenous communities, the separation between Holding Hope and Healing Heart, it just doesn't work, because most people who have lost someone also have others who are struggling, and then multiple losses are so common in Indigenous communities. So to recognize that. So we have our Healing Hearts and our Holding Hope group, and the Holding Hope is with non-judgmental support, no tough love with healthy boundaries is kind of the focus. So that's the work that we do. And I would say probably 90% of our members or more come to us for support. We have Facebook groups. Facebook is not the ideal medium, but we have yet to find something to replace those groups, because they are powerful groups where people interact with each other. So we have Healing Heart and Holding Hope Facebook groups, and we have advocacy groups across the province. And I reached out to you because we are currently, we don't have a director for Alberta. We've had some long-term members for many years served as directors. We don't have anybody right now representing Alberta. And we are really hoping that people who are who are racialized in this society bring their voices forward. And especially we're hoping to have Indigenous representation on our board. So just kind of wanted to make a pitch. And you don't have to be personally affected. Actually, we have learned, initially we were a board of just people who were personally affected, who have lost people or had loved ones who are using. And it becomes so difficult because you're an army of wounded warriors. Yeah. And you don't look beyond or outside. You don't have that critical analysis. Sure. And it can also be very painful. Yeah. So now we are reaching out and looking to have on our board a blend of people with direct lived experience, and others who bring forward the passion for drug policy that we have, and and some understanding of drug policy and the not-for-profit sector. We can teach you drug policy.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So what would be entailed with being a director for Alberta? What does that look like, so that we can try to get that person?
Yeah, we have one national board. And that national board meets once a month, but then there are also committees. And I've been on many boards, and for people who haven't been on boards, being on a board sounds really exciting. But actually, it's often not that exciting, and it's often hard work. It can even be a little tedious, because you're responsible for things like budgets and strategic plans and policies and recruitment. We are really fortunate. We just hired a new ED. There'll be an announcement on that soon. So it'd be great to have a senior staff person in place. So you work closely with the executive director. And so every board member ideally is also on a committee. And then their role is to bring the board work to our local and regional channels to make sure that Alberta is represented on the board. And again, our advocates here in Alberta stay informed as to what the board is doing.
Right on.
So that's kind of in a snapshot. Yeah.
That'd be great. I'm just thinking of like, a person who's always doing liaison work too with like Dr. Esther Tailfeathers as well, because she's just being such a leader in that area.
Yeah.
And up in Edmonton, you guys have one safe consumption site, right?
Well, we actually have several still because Edmonton took a different model.
Yeah.
But before I go there, just about Esther. Esther is a dear friend of mine, and she's one of our members. She's a member of Mom Stop the Harm, and she's a powerful spokesperson. Unfortunately, way too busy to be a director. We would 100%. Love her, but way too busy. But with the consumption site in Edmonton, we integrated the sites, and I was actually that was one of my early advocacy things, helping convince government and funders and local communities that this is a good idea. And my job was, I don't know if you can, I'm showing a picture of Danny. My job was to bring a picture of Danny. We had people presenting the numbers and the public health facts, and people who were explaining how the model would work. And then I say, and this is Danny. And if he could have gone to a consumption site, he would be here today, and sharing his story and such. And it's very powerful. I would say we have to open hearts to open minds.
Yeah.
We are in such a post-truth society where it seems like facts and the evidence, they don't mean anything to certain people, at least. Yeah. So then you have to hit them over the head with your personal stories. Yeah. And say, hey, pause. This is who we are losing if we don't have safe spaces. So I was part of that committee, and there were existing services, the Radius Health, the George Spady, and the Boyle Street Community Services. They were all providing services to people to unhoused community members here in Edmonton. Actually, during a survey that we did at the time that Dr. Elaine Hishka did, 65% of those who were potential users of the consumption site identified as Indigenous in Edmonton. So these organizations were already serving that population. So we created space within their facilities. So people always say, you have 3 consumption sites in Edmonton, but they're combined. They are even less than the space we have at this Shumir in Calgary. Wow. And the UCP closed one. They closed Boyle Street. And ever since then, our death rate in Edmonton, which used to be more on par to Calgary, is been significantly higher. If you look at the per capita death rates and also raw numbers, Edmonton, we've really suffered since that site closed, as has Lethbridge since their site closed.
Oh, Lethbridge has been devastating.
Lethbridge is,
I don't know how people sleep at night, actually. I've really struggled with that. So for me, listening to it is really hard. By the way, I'm sure my listeners would have really liked me to say off the bat, first and foremost, we're so sorry about your loss of Danny. Many of my listeners have had loss when it comes to this very specific conversation. And, I spoke right at the start about the lack of, culturally appropriate health that we get. And there's so many reports that talk about the racism that we experience within the health, realm in general anyway. We have calls to justice, calls to action. We have the Treaty Right to Health with many recommendations there. And these are new concepts for a lot of folks, unfortunately, because again, of that, racism that is so strong, that segregation that is so strong, and people not being informed about being treaty partners in that. So, the Indigenous population obviously being, disproportionately impacted by this. And we've always talked about this being part of the policies of ongoing genocide against Indigenous people. And we're seeing it in real time, whether it's the deaths of the youth within the child welfare system, whether it's the drug crisis, and and then just beyond that, the lack of understanding of our treaty right to health and appropriate cultural resources as a result. So for me, the work you're doing is incredibly important, because if we can't convince white people that white people are worth saving, they're absolutely not going to care about Indigenous people being killed. And just like you were talking about how, folks said Danny had choices, the amount of people that say these racist tropes to us, not having, and I always say that they have the confidence of ignorance to, say that with their full chest, because at the end of the day, they are ignorant about our treaty partnership and the policies that are imposed on us. So I think it's really important that, to me, this is about a genocide crisis. I know, your organization really frames it as a drug crisis, but to me, this is a blatant racist health policy against Indigenous people. And now that they're going to be putting us in jails, they did an announcement yesterday about consent when it comes to health, and yet they're going to exactly go the opposite of what they just said when it comes to these recovery centers. And I use that term lightly, because it's like calling it residential schools. They weren't schools, they were prisons. So I would almost call these like prisons that they're just send our people to, because you're not going to have any voice, not going to have any rights, not going to have basically all your fundamental human rights are being violated at the end of the day. So I just really am struggling with this conversation of forced recovery, when we've been begging for beds, we've been begging for institutions since Ralph Klein cut mental health in general, and mental health supports that were there prior. So for me, this is a crisis that's been long in the making. Multiple government policies that have decided to be at this point where we're seeing it everywhere, and people claim that they're feeling so unsafe, but the truth is, most of that I feel unsafe is just that I don't like looking at natives and I want them segregated. Please throw them in prison so we don't have to look at them. That's really like that underlined racism that's coming through, and not being spoken enough about, because we need more voices being willing to talk about this in a constructive way. We have solutions. We've had solutions since 1996. It's just that people have chosen not to learn about them and not advocate for them. So for me, the work you're doing is really important work. I just wish we could incorporate more Indigenous understanding in all of it, so that it benefits everyone, not just just Indigenous. It literally helps the economy. It helps us with reconciliation, and it helps us learn to be good treaty partners together. So.
Yeah, and thank you for your kind words, and to your listeners for their understanding and their kindness. And it means a lot. I mean, it's been 10 years, but when your child goes before you, it's just not how it's supposed to be, and it's something that alters you forever. But also, I think it's given me more compassion and more understanding, and yeah, a deeper understanding of what others experience. And you're so right. We have known the solutions, but it seems at the moment we are moving further away from them. We are closing down what works. Like in Calgary today, there was a rally about the closure of the Shumir consumption site. It has saved hundreds of lives since it was opened. These are hundreds of funerals families did not have to arrange. Yep. That's always, whenever there's an overdose reverse, to me, it's a family that didn't have to arrange a funeral. And that is so powerful, so important. It means hope. It means hope for the future of that person. And you said about the disproportionate impact on Indigenous communities. Dr. Tailfeathers invited me and also Lorna Thomas to Kainai once to give a presentation. And so we spoke, and we had these circles where people were sharing, and I was sharing about Danny. And afterwards, this mom came up to me and she said, I'm so sorry for your child. But I want to tell you that learning about your child helps me understand that I'm not alone.
Yeah.
I thought it was just Indigenous kids who were dying, but it's everyone's kids who are dying. And to me, of the entire day of spending there and talking, that moment with that mom was so profound because I felt we had bridged something, we had found a connection, her and I. So so we are hoping that if we can get more Indigenous representation, we have Indigenous members, but what I have learned is that if society constantly throws you curveballs, it's much harder to be an advocate. It's much harder to be strong. And I'm still on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, and it's a really, really mean space. But my friend Sarah Auger here in Edmonton, who is a really powerful advocate and an amazing person. She's a professor at the U of A. Her son Lakota died 2 years ago, and she shares the story of her son Lakota. And she said on X, on the Reconciliation Day or the day after, she said, "When the rest of you put your orange shirts away, we are still living this for 365 days a year."
Yeah.
And I was looking at the comments she got, and there was the most horrific racism and misogyny, and so heartless, like to a grieving mom. I could not believe. And never with the worst comments that I've ever gotten did I get anything as bad as what Sarah experienced. So that made me really angry, because here is my comrade, my fellow grieving mom being attacked. But then I thought the attacks on her were so vile, and the racism in them was so evident. Yeah. I'm evaluating how long I can stay on that platform. But then on the other hand, that platform also, it mirrors societies, because these people got to be somewhere, right?
Yep. 100%. And, you can limit the comments for one. So I might reach out to her and talk to her about that, because, but at the end of the day, like, that is our everyday, right? Like we talked about me not being at that rally earlier today. And I said, I can't be with white people who think they're progressive when they're actually quite racist. And the person who really is calling for the closing of the Sheldon Schumer is an absolute racist city councilor. He said some stuff that was so vile, along with some other folks, that it really hurt one of my candidates that, ended up literally getting kicked out of the NDP. Folks who think they're progressive, but actually aren't. They're vile racist at times. And that was a great example of that being shown on both sides, the so-called progressives as well as the conservatives. And so for me, Dan wanting to, close this down, I'm not surprised. He doesn't know anything about Indigenous people, and he constantly works on those tropes. And so this is just another way for him to do that. And him and all of his real estate buddies, the sooner we're all dead, the sooner they get to develop the land and sell it and make lots of money and be pigs in a trough, basically. So for me, it's an underlying ugly, evil theme to it of capitalism and colonialism that a lot of people don't put two and two together in any capacity, because that they're not taught to see it. They're taught to see in small boxes, and that's what colonialism is, right? Is divide and conquer. Whereas natives see that bigger picture and how it all has to work together, right? So.
That us and them, that like you have somebody like Jordan Peterson arguing that he's a native Calgarian.
Yeah.
You're thinking, I'm not a native Calgarian. You're a white person who was born in Calgary, And
that's literally why I have taken that to call it my podcast, so that I can literally make fun of folks like that who are so deathly ignorant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I just wanted to ask you to do one more thing for me, and the reason why is because I think that well, it's just a human construct. You have to be told something, I want to say like 7 times in order for you to get it. So that's why
Mhm.
teachers repeat
Yeah.
themselves. So I talk a lot about naloxone and Narcan, and I was
Hmm.
wondering if you wouldn't talk about it through your lens in the
Yeah.
hopes that maybe we can educate people to the importance of it.
Yeah. And it's an amazing medication. It reverses an opioid overdose. It has no risks really. If you give it to somebody who didn't have an opioid overdose, then you just have to discover the other medical reason why they may be unconscious. So it's no risk, it's easy to use, and it literally saves lives.
Yes.
When I started advocacy, one of the first things I advocated for was to make it available over the counter, which it now is. At any pharmacy, you can pick up an naloxone kit. I don't have one here right now handy, but you can get the kit with 3 vials for injectable free at pharmacies. And if you're indigenous, you can also get the nasal Narcan, the nasal naloxone. It's a little easier to use, especially in winter. Like, if you're in a downtown dark alley and it's -30, it's hard to draw a vial. So the nasal is very good for that. Having said that, a lot of people who use drugs prefer the injectable because it doesn't hit the system quite as hard. Because you want to reverse as much of the overdose that the person starts breathing again. What happens in an overdose, just to step back a moment, is the same receptor in your brain that has a good feeling from an opioid and controls your pain, also controls your breathing. So if you have too much of that opioid, actually what happens is that you stop breathing. And that's why if a person doesn't breathe for too long, they can also come out and maybe have suffered a permanent brain damage. So it's so important to give quick help, not only with naloxone, but also ideally with mouth-to-mouth breath, so you keep that oxygen flow going. I'd also always call 911, because there is, only for so long that naloxone works. But then it's up to the person if they want to go to the with the ambulance or not. I find I've done street outreach with a friend here in Edmonton with Angie Staines from 4B, who does just amazing work. And a lot of people, especially Indigenous people, don't want to go into a racist healthcare system. I wonder why. So it's up to the person then if they will go with the ambulance or not. But it's good to call the ambulance and make sure that you can stabilize a person. So if you don't have a kit, go to a pharmacy or look to one of the mutual aid organizations. They do training. And if you're Indigenous, I think you have to show your card, your status card, to get the nasal. And if you are not Indigenous and you prefer nasal, sometimes it can be helpful to have an Indigenous friend in that case, and they can help you get a nasal kit. That's how I get a nasal kit sometimes, when a friend shares with me.
If you were here, I would offer it to you. I give them out like candies because
Yeah,
to me, that's how we're going to save our people, is
yeah.
by doing that. And when people come to my window and ask for change, I always give them, or I always
Mm.
offer them naloxone, the
Mhm.
nasal sprays. So, and
Yeah,
they almost not always take it because, as you
yeah,
know, if they're houseless at all, they've watched people die right beside
yeah,
them and
yeah.
wish they had that Band-Aid with them.
Yeah, we have to get it in as many hands as possible. And
Yep.
if anybody thinks I will never need it, it's not. No, it's not so. When I ride my bike, I in the summer, I like, or so even now in the fall, still I go around by bike, and if I see a person sleeping somewhere in a park, I stop and I watch, and then their chest rises and falls like very gently, and um, you can tell on their lips or their nails if they're if their circulation is good.
Mhm.
Like if lips get blue or nails get blue or gray, depending on your skin color, it can vary a bit. Then the person might not have good circulation, or if their breathing sort of sounds gargly, um, then I go up to people and I say, "Excuse me, sorry," and then I speak up more loudly and say, sorry, buddy, are you there, buddy? Can you hear me? Sorry, my friend. And then if they wake up and they tell me to F off, I'm very happy because
Same.
that means they're good.
Yeah.
But I always explain, I said, I'm so sorry to have woken you. I know you need your sleep, but I just want to make sure that you're okay. And most of the time people then say, oh, thanks
Yeah.
for checking.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I talk to a group about being trauma informed for that reason. Yeah, you're going to be told to be fuck off all the time, but that's okay.
Yeah,
What matters
yeah,
is that that person's still there,
they're
like that.
breathing.
Yeah, I know it's not about your ego, it's about their safety. And then
Yeah,
sometimes they want to engage, sometimes they don't, and that's okay. And I
yeah,
just let that be. And I wish that more people understood. And that that's the whole thing about a lot of people not understanding this as well. Like, I'm glad you understand why natives don't necessarily want to go into the racist healthcare, but also the problem with calling 911 is that if a cop shows up, then your
yeah,
chance of death has just dramatically
yeah,
increased, which actually is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So,
yeah. That's why I would always stay until the person goes with the ambulance or goes on their own.
yeah,
Because I find again, like if there's cop interaction, if I see cops interacting with an unhoused person, and here in Edmonton, there, I come up and I stand there and I say, "Oh, good morning, everything okay here?" Um, because if they know they're being watched,
yeah,
um, they they're more careful with what they do. It's an unfortunate reality, but one that we have to be aware of and act on. Yeah.
yeah,
So
100%.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm really glad that you came on to talk
Can
about,
I can I
yes,
share talk about some resources?
a hundred
Um,
percent.
yeah. Okay. So I'm going on. I can talk for a long time. So our website is momstoptheharm.com. If anybody wants to join our organization as an ally or become active as an advocate, you can do that on our website. There's also a contact us link where anybody who wanted to join become a director or learn more about that and speak to a current board of director about that opportunity, they can do that through the join to the contact us form or by emailing info@momstoptheharm.
Right
And
on.
our two other websites are Healing Hearts Canada and Holding Hope Canada. And they give you all the information about our support groups for grieving people and for people who are supporting a loved one. And we don't have groups in every community, unfortunately. But we have online groups that anyone who has access to an internet connection could join. And we soon will also have a phone line, which will be good for people who maybe live somewhere where they don't have good enough internet to join an online meeting. Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
great.
yeah. Yeah. Thanks for letting me share those resources.
I want to ask your opinion before I let you go. So,
Mm-hmm,
at the end of
mm-hmm,
every one of my podcasts, I talk about
mm-hmm.
these very specific resources. So, I just want you to tell me what your thoughts on each
Yeah.
of them. So, I always say, if you know someone using substances, do not use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at one eight
Mm-hmm,
eight 688 NORS
mm-hmm,
for support. And basically it's developing a plan, kind of like in domestic violence we always talk about a safety plan to get out.
mm-hmm,
This is like a safety plan so that you survive. um, so they have the Brave, the Doors, and the Lifeguard apps. What are your
mm-hmm.
thoughts on those?
I think they are excellent. Uh, Actually, I recommend NORS instead of DOORS.
Yeah.
Um, like the National Overdose Prevention. The DOORS is the Alberta one. I
Hmm.
don't recommend that one at all because we don't have any data on it.
Yeah,
We
that's what
don't.
I wanted you to say it, because I know I have tried to talk about it with others, and we've had you in
Mm,
on here before talking
mm,
about this as well. But I think it's important that people hear it from you as well, because to me, it's a joke, obviously, and because I did run for the Alberta Liberal Party, a
mm,
lot of people are like, she's just this fucking liberal, she doesn't know. So rather than it just coming from a liberal
Mhm.
talking about why it's wrong. It's just really good to have someone like yourself
No, it's
reaffirm it.
Be Brave and Lifeguard. They give stats on their websites, and where they differ, Be Brave, you talk to a volunteer. Be Brave is really like NORS, but NORS is centrally located, and Be Brave has volunteers across the country. I'd probably be more inclined to call NORS because they're kind of a central location with lots of trained people in one space.
Mm-hmm.
And Lifeguard is for people who don't necessarily want to talk to somebody. Like, I don't know, it's a generational thing. My kids, I almost have to text before I phone them, you
Oh,
know.
yeah, no, it's a
So
pet peeve of mine too, because
yeah,
great generation, they really care about consent. But like for example, I will get a text from somebody at 8 in the morning when if
mm,
they would have just called, I would have had it done, and now it's 2, and I'm like, yeah, you can call
yeah.
anytime.
Yeah, and the other thing is, my oldest, they are neurodiverse.
Mm,
For them, talking on the phone is really difficult. They would probably just prefer interacting with an app. And what the app does, you just have to tell them that you're still there.
hmm.
And if not, you have, prior to using the app, kind of made a plan. How do you respond? If you live in rural Alberta, saying call 911 is not going to be helpful. You're
Yeah.
going to have a neighbor with a kid or a family member who can respond and such. And another thing you can do, the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, there is a video out on remote spotting, like, to just anybody could do it for a friend. And yeah, I did it for someone recently who just told me when they used, and then they sent me a text, and we're going back and forth with all kinds of emojis for half an hour, you know.
Right
And
on.
then they'd say, "Do you still want me to text?" Yes, it's only 10 minutes. We have another 20 to go. So we were every 3 to 5 minutes exchanging emojis.
Good.
So you can do that, but don't use the Alberta government one. It may work, but we don't know. So you don't, it's like a
Yep.
life raft. Are you going to use the one that will float or the one that could potentially float?
Yep. Geez, I'm so glad you talked about it too, because I give the resource, but I don't know if people get it, right? I
Mm-hmm.
have a few others that I know are great, so I'm gonna,
Mm-hmm.
I'll just share them with you. There's a friend of mine, and I actually took with him through the White Bison Society, the Mending Broken Hearts facilitator program. And anyway, he does Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca, and
Mm-hmm.
he does the addiction counseling services, the group
Mm-hmm.
treatment in recovery. He's queer friendly and he's anti-racist. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other one I strongly support is stonewallrecovery.ca,
Mm-hmm.
because that's Canada's first 2S LGBTQ
Mm-hmm.
addiction recovery center. So to me,
Mm-hmm.
and as you know, disproportionate amount of houseless people are also 2S LGBTQ because
Mm-hmm.
of homophobia, transphobia at
Yeah,
home. That
yeah,
now it's safer to be on the streets when you and I know that's not safe.
yeah, yeah.
you know?
I used to work volunteer here in Edmonton after Danny died. Danny was never unhoused, and that was by luck. Well, he was couch surfing for a while, but he was never unhoused by luck, and by having a family who not only had the willingness but also the means
Yeah.
to jump in and put him up in a hotel for a few days if needed, or help out with the damage deposit and such. Not everybody is in the privileged position to do that. Actually, most people are not in a position to just do that out of the blue. Um, so he was never unhoused, but I felt a strong commitment there. And I volunteered at the Youth Emergency Shelter in Edmonton, or yes, it's called Youth Empowerment Society, they call it now. And about half the youth were queer. And of the youth that were queer, I'd say 80 or 90% were kicked out by their parents.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. It's so heartbreaking.
I know. That's why this war on trans
Oh,
and all the youth policies in general,
yeah,
like they don't even recognize how harmful
yeah.
their actions are with these policies. I know,
Oh, yeah.
you know, but
Yeah.
people are
Well,
choosing to vote for that. So I don't know
yeah.
what to do about
Another
that.
plug maybe for Transaction Alberta. If you check their websites, their rallies on Saturday, at 2, I believe, in Calgary and Edmonton. There will be rallies against this horrific legislation that Danielle Smith is pushing through. And I just don't understand the hatred that goes out towards people that maybe constitute not even 1% of our population, but are at a disproportionate risk of all kinds of things: mental health, substance use, dying by suicide. And it's not because people are queer or non-binary or non-gender conforming. It's because of the hatred that's thrown their way.
Yeah, it's
And
really hard. Yeah.
yeah. So
So
yeah, go out, tell. I mean, we won't change what she does, but the more people speak out, the more those who are affected will know, hey, we've got allies on our side.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
about allyship as well.
Yeah,
Mm.
agreed. Geez, I'm so glad you
Yeah.
came on to talk about all of this. Is Mums Stop the Harm the best way to get a hold of you, or do you prefer Twitter for folks to follow you?
No, people can email info at Mom Stop the Harm as well to get in touch with me. Yeah, I try to spend less time on Twitter, and I still go there to read, especially Alberta politics. It's fascinating trove of information when it comes to Alberta politics, and I like politics. But I try to use it less because they also will get rid of blocking, which I'm
Yeah,
very, very concerned about.
yeah, me
Um,
too.
you know, yeah, and people threaten you. You want to be able to block them, right? And going back to what Sarah experienced. So yeah, she is taking a break from Twitter, which is good. Um, so
I
just
don't blame her.
to look after her own wellness. And she's in her second year, and the anniversary is coming up, and those first 2 years are brutal. They're just I feel stronger now. And what my friend Angela says, she was leader of our Edmonton grief group, is it's not that our grief shrinks, but
No,
we grow around it. We grow larger around it,
yeah.
and
Oh,
then we get stronger. Yeah.
it it's a really heavy thing to talk about the amount of loss. And for us, I see. So I was formerly the co-chair for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two
Mm-hmm.
Spirit. And
Mm-hmm.
what I found was that the apprehensions would cause a lot of overdose immediately after they were aged out.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd have the apprehensions causing the trauma that led to the
Yeah.
addiction, which would lead to the overdose and the death. So you have, like this constant pipeline of what's causing and what the solution would be. And it's been very hard for me to talk to people about um, the amount of trauma that happens today. So, for example, and I say this to a lot of folks who always say, "Well, that stuff was in the past," and yeah, like the Indian Act was made in the past, but I graduated from a white school in 1994. Indian hospitals as well as Indian residential schools, they last closed in 1996. So when I
Mm-hmm.
tell people, when you see an Indigenous person that's unhoused and in active addiction, what you're seeing is government policies, whether through apprehension or whether through the residential school system. And now, because we're putting cops in schools, in white schools, you're seeing a direct amount of kids that are going to just go straight to prison because the cops
Mm-hmm.
have already decided who's going to jail. So like that's been really problematic. My daughter is 17, and
Yeah.
negative interactions already with police, with her peer group as well, just going from like the movie theater home. And
Yeah.
and that's just something that people want to deny because they want to deny racism exists. They want to deny that, continuous colonial trauma exists. So
Yeah.
like all of these issues are interconnected, and yet people choose not to see them, and it makes it
Yeah.
very hard. And then of course you're dealing with the ramifications of the funeral and the moms that and the families afterwards that are wishing they knew what you're saying today and what you
Mm-hmm.
know today, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and
we hoped that, that we had, that's our mission kind of as an organization, to pass along that knowledge and make sure that other families can do the right things. And we have success stories in our midst.
Yes.
Moms and dads and families that have supported their loved ones and got them connected to wellness and walked with them lovingly. But the goal cannot always be being off substances. When I talk, I have a large conference coming up in Toronto where I speak. And one thing I say, not everyone can live substance free. No. And I had the opportunity to go to the TRC hearings here in Edmonton when they came through. And I went there saying, I'm informed. I know it was really bad. I know what it's about. I was so ignorant. I was not prepared for the impact of the personal stories of sitting there in this circle and listening to these stories. It was revealing, eye-opening. It was painful, but also helped me form kind of an understanding and a commitment. And I say that if somebody uses drugs to cope with the trauma that a racial colonial system has inflicted on them, who am I to judge them for how they cope with their trauma? People who use drugs still have a right to live. Yes. We have to make sure that people use drugs safely by giving them safe drugs, by giving them safe spaces to use, and by walking with them. And if they find a point where they want to make a change, you never give up hope. But you don't make changing conditional to your love.
Oh, preach. So grateful to have you on today. And
thank you.
I just want to say to my podcast listeners who are not following us on YouTube, I just wanted to say that she's wearing a wonderful black shirt that says "Nice people take drugs," because that is true. And I know a personal veteran friend of mine who was forced on opioids because of the back injury that they had. And so, we're, medically approved to be taking these opioids, but still struggling with the pain, still struggling with, what can be prescribed, et cetera, et cetera. So I wish people understood that, your grandmother can die of an opioid that was prescribed because of a, mishap in taking it, or maybe the pharmacist. There's a million reasons that people can have overdose. And for us to assume everybody is just a person who's not trying hard enough, like, that is something we need to dispel, we need to move forward with. And of course, if you're listening to my podcast, obviously you're already on your anti-racism journey. So I'm grateful to be here with you and with you too, talking about the issues we're facing today. And hopefully people will start carrying naloxone, Narcan, giving them out like candy, and voting for people who understand we need both safe consumption sites as well as recovery centers, and hopefully never forced. That's just going to be an apology in 30 years. I know that. Ugh.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If I can say hi and say, and it's a real, I admire the work you do so much. And it's been, we briefly chatted when we had that little conference in Calgary, and it's been so lovely to spend this time with you. And and to your listeners, thank you for listening.
Oh, we're so grateful that you're here. Thank you for coming on today. And I'm going to give these resources out again, and it'll be in the preamble as well. So hopefully that you can be a part of the solution, be getting the emails and updates from everybody, so we are all on the same page about what to do. Thanks again for coming today, Petra.
Yeah. Take care. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Such a wonderful human being doing the great work out there. So I hope that people had learned something. Maybe they heard it a little differently from her, that you feel a little more compelled to go get that naloxone kit or a nasal spray and give it out like candy to folks, because we are in a war. And unfortunately, the people choosing to elect these governments are the reason why we're in this war. This is, policy we know the evidence says is bad for us. So, please engage your city councilors, your elected officials provincially as well as federally. And hopefully one day we will actually have proper mental health services for everybody. I always think back once upon a time when I, was still advocating for harm reduction when it came to cannabis and legalization. And we always talked about Portugal being such a great model. And now there are places in Europe that are closing all their jails thanks to having proper mental health supports. And that's what I would like to see rather than some, pig in a trough that owns a bunch of prisons making a bunch of money and, pretending they're a good person because it's under the form of addiction. Anyway, folks, if you are interested in learning more about Indigenous people, please join our book club. We meet every second Monday of the month and discuss a book that we've read. A lot of times we go through the reports. We went through all the Truth and Reconciliation Commission volumes as well as the National Inquiry volumes. And we would, love to see you show up to these and see how these calls to action and calls to justice are directly affecting Indigenous people's lives every single day. If you do have the knowledge and you are compelled to act, that is why we have the Reconciliation Action Group. We do have a prerequisite that you understand these 231 calls to justice and 94 calls to action, as well as the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, because if you don't know the basics and if you're not already working on anti-racism, then you're going to cause more harm than help. So it's important that people understand that you're welcome to join that. And I will ask folks, if you are seeing Reconciliation Action Group posts on any of the social medias, please let me know that you've seen it and that you're resharing it, because we have to start combating all of this ignorance that is out there. And if you're unwilling to join a book club, if you're unwilling to be a part of the Reconciliation Action Group, the very minimum you can do is just amplify the messages that we're putting out there, follow other Indigenous content creators, and amplify their voices. When I see non-Indigenous trying to take these spaces, nothing drives me more wild, I tell you. And then seeing like climate change action, podcasts and conversation that aren't centered in settler colonialism, like you're just perpetuating more settler colonialism. So yeah, I'm proud that this podcast gives solutions in cultural safety training and first aid in all of them to create a safer space for people to, have that environment and understanding of what it is we're doing wrong here. Because it seems to me that people don't understand this, and I'm not too sure why. According to the 2024 Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, 87% of racialized groups have experienced discrimination based on religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation. 50% of Calgarians claim to be committed to anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, I hope they understand that just because you want to doesn't mean you are if you're not doing the work. Anyway, thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca. What is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it? Their work, those cultural action tools are available. Please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understandings. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat it here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence that purposely oppressed people are experiencing by the structure of oppression imposed on these lands. RacialEquityTools.org, resource files, What is Internalized Racism by Donna Bevans. Give her some money if you have an opportunity to. It would be really great to support good voices like that doing that good work. So folks like me don't have to reinvent the wheel. We could just always say Donna Bevans, she's the best. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee, afsc.org. That has tons of information. I had another friend remind me for the Reconciliation Action Group that Julie Lalonde has a ton of information as well. It's more women based as well, and it's great. So anyone can do bystander intervention. So when you see a counselor is saying ignorant things, you should call them out on it. Seeing a little bit of that in the States with the election. I mean, it's just days away and this will air long after, so we'll already know who the next president is. But it is important that people start to understand you are a bystander and you can act by intervening. So if you just type bystander intervention, you will find tons and tons of resources. One I listed, but lots of others as well. If you see or experience racism, report it to acttoendracism.ca. You can text at 587-507-3838. And that's just here in Calgary. I wish anyone who follows me on my social media would watch the anti-racism organizational lead for the City of Calgary give a presentation on the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader. I wish everyone who listens to my podcast would see themselves as an anti-racism leader in progress. Definitely support stopthestack.ca or stopthestackyyc.ca, because that is helping our Black Lives Matter activists who are being legally targeted and helping them moving forward in a good way. Indigenous have been talking about these issues, sharing our traumas and reports, commissions, public hearings. Quit disregarding it. No more. Honor our words. Honor the treaties. It is time that people listen to their politicians and their policies and platforms. Like we just seen, it was finally called. Scott Moe won the election, and he's just like Daniel Smith on this fight against transgender people. But out east and in BC, the conservatives that were promoting that were kicked out. Thank God. I'm hoping we're starting to see a switch here where we're not focusing on hating trans folks. And to those who are trans that might be listening, God love you, first and foremost. I hate that you are being under attack like this. I feel like you're seeing the negative, hateful rhetoric that Indigenous people face every day. An Indigenous, trans, or non-binary, a two-spirit, you do not deserve any of this. And I will fight until my last breath to make sure that I am taking that bullet for you, because it is unacceptable. You are valid, and better than that, I wish every trans person, non-binary, and especially the Indigenous two-spirit understood. You help us see outside the box. You're the ones who create great ideas. And I'll give you an example. I seen a veteran crosswalk, and I know the only reason why that exists is because the 2S LGBTQ community suggested rainbow crosswalks. So and prior to that, I had seen an orange and white one, and it was a reconciliation theme, which I know wouldn't exist without our two-spirit talking like that. So I want to throw that out at you. I want you to know how much I value you, how much I've learned from you over the course of my straight cis life, and know how valuable you are, how sacred you are to me. And I hate that you have to witness these stupid petty politics by stupid conservatives who think this is going to win them elections, and they're morons who vote for them. I'm so sorry. You do not deserve that. So folks who are listening, know your vote matters. Every vote matters. BC took a long time because every vote mattered. So no, even if you are against voting in principle, I exercise my vote, even though, I know it's likely going to a losing candidate. I don't care. To me, it matters because I'm honoring all of the Indigenous people that fought for that right to vote in colonial politics. That doesn't negate my sovereignty as an Indigenous person to these lands. So that's why I do it. And you're welcome to disagree with me 100%. But I hoped that people will start demanding the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry. I'm just going to stress this one more time. If you claim to be a part of the 2S LGBTQ community and you are not centering Indigenous voices and those 231 calls to justice, you're being racist, bottom line, because those solutions help you. This isn't just and same with white women organizations. Like, these calls to justice help all Canadians. They help Indigenous, they help non-Indigenous. And the fact you can't see it is your racist showing, your racism, your anti-Indigenous bias coming through. So calling you out, folks. Provincially, we have these, 113 pathways to justice from the, Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. But when she's literally putting anti-trans legislation forward, she's not respecting these pathways to justice at all. So, I need more people calling this out. It's ridiculous. Municipally, we have the White Goose Flying Report, and yet here you have this councillor, Dan, not getting it at all. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in every institution, from health to justice to education to everything, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians if they don't understand their treaty partners. They don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, ableism, sexism. They have zero business running. Should be understood by everyone. You can Google how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies. There's oodles of information out there. Not to mention the Calgary Foundation has a great ally toolkit that you can utilize to be a better person. Not to mention the amount of authors from Black and Indigenous peoples that you can learn from. And in fact, I have a friend who's possibly coming up on the podcast, but she just wrote Crossing the River, an unsettling memoir. Her name is Sandra Hayes Gardner. So if she doesn't come on, I hope you consider just reading that, because it's doing an autobiography, understanding now in retrospect with the lens of reconciliation what happened in her lifetime. So anyway, be an ally. So aboriginalalert.ca and Missing Children Society of Canada are two groups that I've tried to highlight in all of my social media when people go missing. So if you only show police, I don't know, colonizer. Womenshomelessness.ca has some good information for folks who you're just too racist. You can't possibly just listen to Indigenous people. Well, here's some white organizations for you. Obviously, our guest, Petra, today, we talked a lot about the drug poisoning deaths that are happening, the policies by, government in general causing this horrible, horrible tragedy that's unfolded in front of us. Again, if you know somebody who's using substances, please don't use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS for support, or download the NORS, Braves, or DOORS or Lifeguard apps. The DOORS app obviously is an Alberta initiative that doesn't mean anything, but hey, maybe it'll work for you. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca. You can also donate to them. They provide free one-on-one addictions counseling services, group treatment for recovery in Calgary. They are queer-friendly and anti-racist. And as well, Canada's first 2S LGBTQ Addiction Recovery Center is stonewallrecovery.ca. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope Wellness Helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It is toll-free and open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also text at hopeforwellness.ca. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. And for folks who might be 60 scooped, there is an Indigenous Society of Alberta, SSISA.ca. Indian Residential School Survivor and Family Hotline is also 866-925-4419. The Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868, and you can text at 686868. The Native Youth Crisis Hotline is 877-209-1266. The LGBTQ Youth Line, it is 647-694-4275, and that's text only because the can't call. Or you can go to youthline.ca for more. For the non-Indigenous, you can go to almost every functioning 211 across the country. There's also the 988. You can also text 988, and you can go to 988.ca for the 2S LGBTQ. We have lots of different you know, options for you. If you live in Toronto, if you just call 211, you're going to find a wonderful pilot that's happening in your area that I'm so jealous about, but I'm hoping it's working. Find out more at twospirits.org. So that's the number two, spirits with an S.org. For my American friends, I just want to say shout out to all of my international listeners, to my American friends, your Two Spirit identity. Strongheartshelpline.org, 1-844-7-NATIVE or 1-844-762-8433. If you're in Canada, it getsbettercanada.org with tons of resources for 2S LGBTQ+. Warning for the QT BIPOC. I've seen some of the orgs lists in Alberta, and not all of them practice anti-racism or have Indigenous education. So you might want to try the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls hotline, because again, point saying is that, if it just says LGBTQ, then I know it's racist. I know they're not practicing Indigenous education. And if they're not censuring 201 calls to justice as solutions for folks, I also know that they're being racist. So violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. I started this podcast because, we don't have very many people who are educated on these issues talking about them that are Indigenous. And I've never heard of a Satu Dene woman talking like this. So anyway, I don't want to, deal with tone policing, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions, people who don't want to hear my opinion, but sure like to tell their incredibly ignorant one to me, folks who don't know anything about Indigenous or colonialism, the constant surveillance of our people, our vigils, our rights, our protests. I and many others share, examples daily. It's unacceptable. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism and gatekeeping, and folks who are surviving off of this ridiculous system, so they like the status quo. Whereas there are other people who are so in their trauma, they are depleting the time it takes to do a podcast, to do outreach, et cetera, et cetera. Internal, external racism is an everyday reality for me, other Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT, BIPOC, and more. Masi Cho to my ancestors, my granny to my mama, what strength looks like through your examples. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family, and to my husband who produces and edits the show. He has been my husband, childhood friend, father of our child, and my support down this journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily and honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I just hope my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues. Honor the Blackfoot, the elders and members have been kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce it in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. The last thing I want to do is this touch grass moment. There are a lot of dark things I talk about and we see on media and social media. So I think it's important to remember like the cute things, the happy things. And I'd love to hear about yours if you have one that you want to share. And I was really happy in my last podcast to tell that story, that email that somebody sent me. But because it's coming up to Halloween, I just think for me, I wanted to just share a little story, and it's a little personal because it was my own child. And when they were first at the age that they could start walking, so that they would have been just over a year um, for their for this Halloween. You know, she went to a neighbor who had done an incredible amount of work of making like a haunted house a scary place. And my child, like, just too sensitive and would not even go down the sidewalk. So, you know, it was really hurtful to the person and they quit doing it as a result. But for me, I've always, because of that moment, it really affected me in a good way, though, in the sense that it taught me that, you know, who do you really want coming down your side? You want these cute little princess fairies coming down and enjoying Halloween and having a wonderful memory. So I changed all of my decorations to only have like, you know, cute Halloween stuff because, you know, this generation is so sensitive. Petra and I talked a little bit about that, how they don't like to just make a phone call; they prefer texting. And so a thing that I had learned about was disability trick or treating as well. And a lot of people will set up a table at the end of their sidewalk so that they can basically be more accessible for all the kids who may need a wheelchair or have trouble walking, but can still wants to dress up, still wants to participate in Halloween in a good way. So, and that really touched my heart because that was not a conversation we had at all during growing up. And I want that for the next generation. So thanks, folks, for always listening. And I always end every podcast with that sad eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not your dish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks again, folks, for listening.